Hey friends, so in reading the thumbnail for this video that says the longer you pretend you don't have a problem, the bigger the problem becomes, seems like that's common sense, right? And look, it is easy to say that, but how easy is it really to do it? When we are going through times of difficulty, there are lots of times where ignoring the problem is our first reaction as soon as we see that difficulty coming down the road. Hell, sometimes we do it even if we don't, by pretending that whatever is happening isn't really happening, by just putting it aside and thinking, I don't want to deal with this right now. And look, that's okay somewhat in some circumstances. Sometimes life hits you with some really difficult, painful 2x4s that you're just not ready for, and taking a quick pause is not just important, but it's necessary so that you can gather yourself and get together a plan of dealing with whatever's happening. But there are many, many times when we do this for a little too long, and we end up making things 1,000 times worse for ourselves. See, the thing is, never in the history of problems has ignoring them made them go away, at least not without consequences, or without it at least costing us something. In fact, let's be real, when you ignore your problems, you usually end up making them worse in the end, right? If this is you and you're feeling called out right now, please don't take it personally. Ignoring a problem at first is very much a normal human reaction. You have no idea how guilty of doing this I have been. Hint, it's happened a lot. And later, when I do solve the problem, after it became infinitely more difficult or more expensive or more painful, or sometimes all of those, I ended up being pretty pissed off at myself for not just doing something earlier than I did. So I am definitely not talking about things I don't know about or haven't experienced in my own life too. Why do we do this, friends? Why do we know that something is a concern or see warning signs that something is on the horizon, but we still choose to do nothing? Is it because maybe we think our spirit animal is an ostrich? I mean, that's what they do to evade danger, right? What if I told you that's not actually true? It's a myth, an urban legend, if you will. Ostriches do not actually do this because, and this makes perfect sense, if they buried their heads completely in the sand, they wouldn't be able to breathe. So perhaps that would be safe to hide from danger in, but they would also asphyxiate themselves. And since they're pretty intelligent animals, well, they find other ways to take cover. Not really sure how that myth even began. From what I have read, I think it has something to do with the fact that they dig these big holes to hide their eggs. Not sure though, I'm not an ostrichologist, so I'll Google it later. But anyway, whether or not what ostriches do to hide is true, the parallels to what we do as humans are definitely there. I mean, when we see physical problems in ourselves, like frequent headaches or inability to sleep or other things, we often think, I'll make some lifestyle changes at some point to address it. No biggie, nothing is falling off right now. Let's carry on, burying your head in the proverbial sand. Then, a couple of weeks later, you wake up with the worst headache you've ever had, or, God forbid, something much worse happens. Can we say that we didn't have at least a little bit of warning that something was not quite right with our bodies? Or say when we're having some issues at home, maybe a shelf is sagging a bit precariously, or a leaky faucet somewhere, or an avalanche is about to happen in your garage, we ignore that and think, oh, the problem would take like 10 minutes to solve, but I don't really want to deal with it, so I'm just going to ignore it. Then one morning, you wake up to a shelf that has fallen and broken everything that was on it, or a burst pipe, or a garage that looks like there was a natural disaster or a mudslide in there. Now how long is it going to take to fix? Definitely more than 10 minutes, that's for sure. Or you notice your relationship seems a little rocky lately. You are talking to each other less, more interested in what's going on with everything and everyone else instead of what's going on inside your house. You start bickering more, snapping at each other. You don't know what's going on, but you know something is different. It feels off. But you think, I don't like what's going on here. I know there are some problems somewhere, clearly, but I don't want to deal with this right now. I don't want to talk about it or pull strings to see what's wrong. And next thing you know, you're spending less time together, and one partner comes home one day and asks for a separation or a divorce. Can you say that that was really a surprise? Not really, because there was an issue there, but since nobody wanted to talk about it, it grew into a resentment and a dissatisfaction. So I think you get what I'm trying to say here. Just dealing with the issues when they arose instead of much later or not at all would have resolved at least 99% of the scenarios I just mentioned. And look, I'm not sitting here telling you anything that you probably don't already know, like I said in the beginning of the video, but since most of us know that simply burying our heads in the proverbial sand is not the right thing to do, it's not the solution, then why do we do it by default or wait to solve things until it has become a much larger problem and it's too late? Sometimes it's because we don't realize some problems are really, really detrimental to our lives if we just leave them hanging somewhere. Even when something is not super serious or life-threatening, leaving them to their own devices can come back to haunt us deeply and wreak havoc. Sometimes we completely understand all of what I just said. We know it's serious, but fear stops us from dealing with it head on. We become afraid of the process of solving problems because sometimes, let's face it, solving problems requires us to get messy sometimes. Or it's a time-consuming, anxiety-provoking process. In some cases, solving a problem is going to require us to be really honest with ourselves and others, or be vulnerable, and that can be very uncomfortable for some people. Sometimes it's going to require us to step way out of our comfort zone and admit we were wrong, or apologize, or make amends, or humble ourselves because we have no choice at that point. Nobody wants to do, well, any of that, I know. But there are so many times when we could have avoided things getting to that point by, yep, you guessed it, just dealing with the problem much sooner. Friends, look, very often ignoring a problem makes you not a part of the problem, a big one, because in your urge to put the problem off or at least not trying to resolve it, you're making it much worse. I hate to say this in such a blunt manner, but it's unfortunately the truth in so many of our situations. We end up suffering the most from the wounds we inflict on ourselves. And sure, when we ignore problems, it does give us that quick, little, easy, stress-free moment. It gives us a little boost that, hey, everything is fine. Nope, that's totally not on fire around me. I mean, look at this cat who stepped in the brownie. Isn't that funny? Let's watch it again about 20 more times. And that is something I actually did with a video one time to avoid having to do something. No lie. But that quick little burst of relief that you got from the cat and the brownie or whatever, you substitute whatever it is your preference is there, did that little burst of relief really do anything in the long run to solve the problem? Spoiler alert, absolutely effing not. The problem is still there and will continue to be, unless it gets bigger, and it likely will. Bigger problems create bigger stress. Think about solving problems much like you would moving a plant that you just bought from, say, your front yard to your backyard. When is the best time to do that? When the tree is young or as small as possible. At that time, it's easy to uproot. The roots are shallow and fragile, right? You can do it with your hands even sometimes, depending on the tree. But let's say that you don't do that. You wait. Maybe a few weeks, maybe even a few months. Maybe you forget about it altogether and years pass. And then all of a sudden that plant isn't a plant anymore. Now it's a tree. And because it was allowed to grow where it was planted initially, it has become way, way more difficult to uproot now. The trees may not have just deepened and spread. They might have spread under your driveway or your house. There's no way you can uproot and move that with your hands. Hell, you may not be able to do it with a spade or yourself at all. Even you may need to call in a professional. And you probably want to at that juncture so you don't do even more damage. That is going to cost you money and time, a lot more than it would have been if you had just moved the darn tree in the beginning. I don't know about you, but I'd be pretty frustrated with myself in that scenario. But truthfully, I'd have nobody to blame but me for it. And so problems are really no different. When a problem is small and in the early stages like a plant, it's easy to strike at the root. Pun intended. You need less effort, definitely less money, less time, less resources to solve it because it is at the moment a small problem. But when the problem becomes a tree and it's been ignored long enough, it is almost always going to take more effort, more resources, more money sometimes, and more time to solve. So, which do you think is easier? Not to be Captain Obvious here, but my money is on handling the problem sooner, because if you use this same logic for real situations that happen in your life, it's always going to be easier to address a health issue when you spot something that has potential for causing you trouble down the road, when you feel like something is wrong. It's always going to be easier to bridge a gap in communication that may arise in a relationship by having an open, honest conversation now, rather than letting that gap turn into a chasm that may become irreparable. It's always going to be easier to fix something that is still fixable before it falls to the ground, smashing in a million pieces, where it's not fixable anymore at all. It is almost always a guarantee that life is going to come around and hand you a problem or 2 or 10. That's just how it goes. And it's almost always a guarantee that the longer you ignore those problems, the more difficult they're going to be to solve. And look, trust me, I know this is, again, definitely easier said than done. However, it's still the truth. So, even if you know that no matter what you do, there's always going to be some kind of problem to solve, there is a little bit of a silver lining I want to offer in this inevitability. When you set aside some of your fear and you face problems head on, it empowers you. It boosts your confidence and your belief in yourself. Even if all you do is take one step towards solving it. Just one. I mean, that is an achievement in and of itself. And you can take that empowerment and that confidence and put it towards finding a solution. Finding a solution is always much better than fixing blame or just running away from things, pretending that they're not there. I know it may not seem like it sometimes when you are working through things, but it will save you a lot of important things that you can't get back, like time and effort. And it will give you a win, even if it's small. And sometimes those wins are just what we need to keep going and moving forward. Not to mention, your future self, which we talk about a lot around here, will definitely thank you for that one. Trust me. That's all I've got for you this week. I'll be back next week with another priority message. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Bye.